I might need someone to let me know in a second. Can you see my screen? Can you see OneNote?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so last lesson you were supposed to read this article as homework, and so you should have pre-read it. So if you haven't done that yet, I'm not going to be reading the article. I'm going to be scanning over some sample annotations. You really have to keep up for that to make sense. So if you haven't read the article, a lot of this information you might not know yet, and I'm skipping ahead. We're creating podcasts. So podcasts are audio recordings, and there's 2 pages we're going to use today. We're going to use, so this is the lesson, the sample process, and then we're going to refer to this summative podcast page that's kind of got all the assignment details on it. So really, I'm just kind of going through the process. Here's our animal of the day. This is the axolotl. They're actually endangered, some species of axolotls that live in Mexico City. The Aztecs used to eat them as a food source. They're small, but they're super cute. They live in aquatic environments, like swamps and streams. Okay, so the article that you read last time was about tropical snakes disappearing because of a fungal outbreak. And the point, I'm just going to zoom over to some blank space here so I can write, and hopefully this will work. The point of what we're doing today is kind of going through like modeling the steps that you would be doing to create your own podcast. And so the first thing that you're really doing is the research step. And so that's going to involve like the reading of the articles. And so the reading that you did last class as homework, that's the practice. This is the sample article. This snakes article is not an option for your podcast. And so you start by reading and kind of gathering information. And one way that we do that is by making annotations and notes. You do this a lot in humanities. Your annotations and your notes can then be used as part of your script for your podcast. It kind of helps you plan what you're going to say. The next kind of stage in research is to start to put together your ideas. And so what I've done to help you is I've given you some guiding questions. And so what you're going to do is start by reading annotations, make some notes, and then you're going to use your annotations and your notes to try and answer the questions. The questions are there to keep our podcast on point, to keep them on a specific topic so that we're all talking about similar things. And those things that we're trying to focus on are that cause-effect relationship. Okay. I just want to double check. Can everybody see what I'm writing? Yes, no? Someone turn on
Yeah.
them. Okay, good.
Yes.
All right. I hate to get too far and then realize nobody can see it. And so that's kind of the research step is once you've done the guiding questions, then you can start to form an argument or an explanation. And in science, we construct our explanations in a certain format. We use that CER format. So you can take your answers from the questions and kind of structure them into a graphic organizer where you would make a claim. And this is really like, what is the topic or the main idea in your article? What evidence do you get from your article? And then this is where you're explaining the connections, you're making predictions, and you're talking about that cause-effect relationship. This is all what's involved in the sort of research and planning stage. Once you've completed that, you really have all of the information you need to be ready to start writing a script. And so that's kind of the step 2 is your script. And it's very similar to the one we did with the atoms. You're not publishing the text on Spotify, you're recording your voice. So your script doesn't have to be written like a perfect humanities essay. It can be conversational. You can add spaces between lines if you want a natural pause. But you're basically taking your ideas from above and turning it into a conversation with your audience. We'll talk more about the script stuff a little bit later. Today's lesson really just focuses on this first stage of research. So we're going to go through and kind of model that process together with the sample article. So you've already read the sample article once, and it might even take reading an article a couple of times. While you're reading through, you're going to want to take annotations and notes. Annotations can be very personal. They look different for everybody. Some people like to just highlight and then write notes on a different page. Some people like to write all over the text. Whatever format works for you. But before you start making annotations, I suggest you go back to the summative page and just review what the focus of our podcast is, because that helps you know like what things to circle or what things to point out. And so our podcast really has to do with cause-effect relationships. And so you're looking to provide evidence, which is going to come from the article, of the effects of resource availability on a population within an ecosystem. And so I think I put that's right. I put that on this page. Kind of looks like this. So in your article, there's going to be some sort of change in a resource. Maybe there's more of something. Maybe there's more biotic resources. There's more prey available. Maybe it's better weather, more water. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. Maybe it means less of a resource. And so that's the cause, and that's going to have some sort of an effect on a population. Maybe the population increases, maybe the population decreases. This is going to be the main focus of your article. But oftentimes, one effect is also going to have secondary and tertiary effects. And that's kind of what you're looking for to find in your article. The advice that I will give you is most of the articles will talk about that and they'll actually use the words cause and effect, but not all will have that language very directly written in there. You've got to investigate, you've got to kind of be detectives and interpret what they're saying. So they're not going to be as simple as saying, here's the cause, here's the effect, here's the claim, here's the evidence and the reasoning. You have to interpret that information and apply it, your understanding, to pull that kind of information out of the article. So that's what we're going to do today. Is I'm going to show you my annotations and how I've looked for specific things like cause and effect relationships. Any questions before I move on?
No.
Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole article to you because that was homework from last class, but I'm going to show you some of my annotations and then we'll go through the questions. So I started circling things and adding the science words to them that we've been studying in the lessons. So for example, this article was about a fungus. So that's an increase in something living, a biotic factor. So fungi are living organisms. So I identified it as a biotic factor. I'm going to read the first paragraph to you because I think it's important. For the last half century, a deadly fungus has wiped out populations of frogs and salamanders around the world. Known as chytrid, it has driven the decline or extinction of at least 500 species, making the world's most destructive pathogen in terms of biodiversity loss. So this first paragraph I identified as their claim. They're basically saying, here's the cause, here's this fungus, so that's my cause, and here's its effect that it's having on populations. It's affecting amphibians or frogs and salamanders. And it's causing them to decrease or be completely wiped out. And so I've just kind of identified it as the first effect. But in the title, they talk about snakes. So they haven't mentioned snakes yet. So this is actually the primary effect here. This is the first thing that's happening. Think of it kind of like dominoes. And so I even just wrote notes on the side. I identified their claim. There's an increase in the chytrid fungal population, which causes a decrease in the snake populations. The snake part comes a little bit later on. And then I just started going through and highlighting things like key facts, any data points that they highlight, and any other effects that I notice. So for example, we know it has to do with the frogs and salamanders, but here they make note of mentioning animals that feed on those frogs and salamanders. So that's a secondary effect. It's causing issues down the food chain. So they start to move into evidence. evidence, depending on the article that you read, is going to look a little bit different. Some articles are very factual. They give you statistics, they give you numbers, they give you graphs. Other articles are more observations. They will describe things, they will identify facts, but they don't give you actual numbers. That's okay. They're both types of evidence. You can use either source. So for example, in this one, I've highlighted some facts. Amphibian decline has taken a heavy toll on tropical snake species. That's kind of to support the claim. And that the diversity has declined. And a little bit further down, here's a fact. So this is kind of a piece of evidence. They think a dozen snake species have disappeared from the area. So I might identify this as evidence that I'm going to use later. Here's some more effects. So because we have amphibians disappearing, there's no food for the snakes. So then we have snakes disappearing and amphibians disappearing. Now there's also no food for the birds and the mammals. So that's kind of the next domino effect, or a tertiary effect. Tertiary means three or third. So then as I keep scanning down the article, I've got some more facts. So the raw data alone was enough to suggest that chytrid was indirectly harming the snakes. Before the fungal invasion, the scientists recorded seeing 30 different species. Afterwards, they found only 21 and far fewer quantities. So that's a really good piece of evidence. In your podcast, you can directly quote the article. So you just want to find the author's name or the scientist who collected the data. Or you could say, like, this article shows that, and state your fact. Here's some more evidence. So 13 out of 36 snake species saw, they spotted only once, so that means they're declining in numbers. Some other things you can do for annotations is if you come across terms, vocabulary, or concepts that you don't understand, don't just skip past them and think, oh, that's not important. It might be. So if there's words or things you don't understand, circle it, come back to it later, so that you can go and look it up and see if it is actually important. So in this case, homogenization of the population. If you don't know what that means, it means most of the species, there's more of the same species and not a lot of biodiversity. It also means within a species like snakes, there's less genetic diversity. And so that eventually slows evolution, it slows reproduction possibilities, and will eventually lead to the decline of the species. So these are just kind of some examples of facts, statistics. So this is the evidence from the articles. So they continue to go on to discuss the cause again. So they're giving you kind of some background information on this fungus. So I've just identified it as the cause. That might mean you need to go and find further information. So it's okay to do your own research, but most of the information for your podcast should come from these articles. You shouldn't have to do too much external research. It might just be things like, okay, get a few extra points like definitions or facts if you need them. A little bit further down, here's some more evidence. So they're giving actual numbers. They recorded seeing the animals 149 times, but that declined by a factor of 3 after the fungus. And then a little bit further down, it even talks about all these frogs and salamanders and stuff, they're dying and their bodies are piling up in the streams. So I had a question, what's the effect on the streams? Does that cause another sort of chain reaction effect? And they actually do talk about that a little bit later on. So they're giving some more evidence. And then here's the effect on the streams. So because you don't have the tadpoles in the streams, there's more algae growth. Algae deprives all the other plants and organisms in the stream of oxygen. So then they're going to have all these chain reactions of organisms that live in the streams. If you see any quotes or things that you really like and you want to quote directly, maybe you think it's really powerful, maybe it's really important, make note of something that you want to use. You can totally direct quote your article. but everything else needs to be transformed into your own words. So again, I'm just kind of highlighting facts. I'm identifying cause and effects. I'm pointing out what is evidence. So that's kind of how I would do annotations. Any questions about annotations?
No, I need to go get lunch.
Okay, go ahead. It is being recorded.
Okay.
Okay, so the next step in research is once you've kind of read through your article and annotated it, I've given you some guiding questions to help kind of put your information together to make sure you're meeting the assignment requirements. And so the first step is just a brief summary of your article. This does not have to be written like a script. It will be turned into a script eventually, so just keep that in mind. One thing that I would suggest for this is if you are going to copy from an article, if you're going to directly quote something, make sure you make note that it is a quote here so that you don't have to go back later and figure out what is copied and what is in your own words. So you can do that by just simply adding like quotation marks around text, and then you know that you copied directly from the article. A brief summary is always a good way to start a podcast. It gives your audience just kind of an idea of what the podcast will be about. So just kind of a general idea about what the article information was telling us. And then I also asked what an ecological resource is. And that's because that's the focus of our article. We're talking about a change in a resource and how it affects the population. So really just informing your audience what this is helps them understand what you're talking about. So this can be biotic or abiotic. In the case of our article, it's a food source. So we're taking something out of the food chain. The fungus is killing off amphibians, which are a food source for snakes. And then so the next question kind of talks about that. What is the specific resource that your topic is about? So in this case, we're removing the prey for the tropical snakes. It's affecting predator-prey relationships, it's affecting food chains. The article makes specific mention to snail sucker snakes, but also all tropical snakes. And that they eat the eggs from the frogs and the salamanders. They also eat the frogs and salamanders themselves, but their main food source is their eggs. And then how do changes in the availability of a resource impact the population? So this should be specific to your article. So in this case, the fungus doesn't directly affect the snakes. Remember, it's kind of a chain reaction, primary, secondary, cause-effect relationship. The fungi is impacting their prey directly. So it's killing the amphibians within this ecosystem. That's then leading to a decline in tropical snakes. So it's their resource, their food source. And then are there any secondary impacts? Or maybe there's even tertiary impacts. So this is where you would kind of summarize that evidence that you found. This is where you're starting to use from your article anywhere that you wrote like tertiary effect, secondary effect, primary effect. This is where you start to gather that information. These are all of the effects. Sorry, I'm scrolling down here. So in this case, the primary cause is the fungus. It leads to the death of the amphibians, so this is the effect. But then there's these secondary cause-effect relationships. Because there's no amphibians now, or less of them, things that eat them, like the snakes, have less food. So that's the second effect, or secondary effect. It goes further, so we have further sort of chain reaction effects. Snakes are also prey for other organisms, like birds. Same with the amphibians, so it leads to a loss in their food source. Because there's less tadpoles, there's algae blooms in the ponds. This starves aquatic plants of oxygen. Also fish and other animals living in the streams are all going to die out because they don't have enough oxygen. So it has kind of a continual chain reaction. This is going to be one of your most important questions to help plan your podcast. This is where you really start to talk about the cause-effect relationships. And then this one is just kind of clarifying, does an increase in this resource lead to an increase in the population, or the opposite? So in this case, we have an increase in fungus, but it's doing the opposite. It's causing a decrease in the population of amphibians. Some of the articles you read will have different relationships. Some will have like a decrease in a resource leading to a decrease in a population. And then what is the evidence? So this is where you can kind of copy and paste from your article. Again, if you're going to use a direct quote, please make sure that you remember that you are using a direct quote. You can use quotation marks. So this is where anywhere that you wrote evidence, these are kind of those facts, details, numbers, observations, all of that stuff there is where you would put your information. So any kind of evidence to support their claim. What's the overall general impact of a change in the availability of the resource? Well, in this case, it's affected the entire food chain. It's going up and back, up and down. It's having multiple different effects, but it's causing a decrease in population for various organisms. So I might even add that as causing. Some of the articles that you're going to read, these answers will be very obvious. Others you're going to have to think about. You're going to have to use your brain to pull that information out. So please be aware that you don't expect to just read the article once and have all the answers easily written directly there for you. There's a reason that this is going to take several days and that it's summative. This is where you apply your knowledge. You have to think. You have to interpret the information and put it into your own words. The last question is just, is there any other information you would provide? Maybe you did some extra research, like maybe you defined a couple of words, any other facts that might be relevant. You may or may not have anything for that question. That's okay. So that's the first step in kind of taking all the information from your article and putting it together to try and understand the information in it. The next step is to start to form a claim, evidence, reasoning type argument. From this is what you would kind of build your script on. And so it doesn't have to be full sentences yet. I just took answers from the questions and kind of grouped them. So I have a cause-effect relationship, that's the claim. I sort of moved all the evidence to down here, all the evidence that I wanted to use. And anything that I wanted to direct quote, I made sure to kind of say like, oh, I want to make sure that I use this exactly word for word. And then the reasoning is going to be a little bit blended, but reasoning means this is where you explain what the article's information is about, you make connections and predictions. Oftentimes the article is not going to tell you things like secondary and tertiary effects, but you can make those predictions. You can start to say things like, well, if this is the first effect, I believe it's going to have secondary effects, and those might be things like blah, 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 whatever your article is about. And so this is just to kind of help plan out your script. This would be the kind of research, still part of the research stage. And then from this, you start to form a script, which we can talk about in future lessons. So that's kind of a really quick crash course. I suggest you read through the assignment again one more time as well. But do I have any questions before I kind of talk about the topic choices in your exit ticket? Is there anybody still there?
No.
Okay. So the exit ticket today, you're not actually starting your podcast. You don't have to worry about it today. All you're doing is just taking a look through some of the articles and picking some of the topics that you would be interested in choosing. Right now, I'm leaving it pretty open. It's okay if we have duplicates. However, the reason I'm asking you for 3 choices, if I start to see that everybody's picking the same article, I'm going to ask some people to change and maybe move to their second or third choice. That's why you're not starting until next class. I want to see your choices first. I might also suggest a different article for you. Maybe I don't necessarily think that the topic is the right fit for you. So your choices are really important. At this point, they're all open, they're all available. and the topics can be found on the summative assignment page. So if you kind of scroll down to the bottom, they're organized by abiotic and then biotic resources. And then within each of those kind of larger groups, there's like a subtopic. So maybe you're interested in drought. Here's a whole bunch of possible articles related to drought. When you're doing your podcast, you can focus on one article, but you can always pull from all of them. If you want to use more than one within the same topic, you can totally do that. Depends on the article, right? Some are very closely related. Some topics only have one article, and that may or may not be enough information for you. Maybe you'll have to do some additional research. So the topics are underlined, bold, and black. For the articles, you should have, I'm not sure, but I was told you guys have Newsela accounts from Humanities and from last year. If you don't, so for example, I'll find a Newsela article. Here's a Newsela article. It's free, just create a quick, simple account, then you should be able to read the whole article. So create your school login, school password, whatever works for you. But that most of the articles are Newsela based, so you will need a Newsela account. For National Geographic, same thing, you can create a free account. It's very easy, just sign up, follow the prompts. You only get 3 months, but that should be time to complete this. If you're having trouble accessing an article and you are really passionate about it, let me know, and I can try and download it for you. Because I did check all the links before, and creating an account, I was able to get access to everything. So you should be able to do all the topics. Any questions?
No.
Okay, so moving forward, today isn't actually like a science class, but because this was yesterday and I know we have to be a little flexible, I wasn't able to have the meeting. If you could just pick your topic choices, that would be great, because I need to be able to kind of give you a thumbs up, yes or no. But we're not doing any actual new work today. If you want to start working on the podcast, you can. But if you have work from science that is missing, or if you have work from other classes that are missing, today through Monday is meant to catch up on work. So starting Tuesday will be kind of our first official class to work on your podcast. Does that make sense? And you're going to get 4 classes to work on it. But if you want to start chipping away at it now, you can.
Okay.
And then if there's anybody that's really passionate about doing a podcast, I was kind of talking to Miss V in South Africa, and we talked about maybe even having people interview her, or her son Aiden, because they live right near a national park, so like safari in Africa. We could talk a little bit about her ecosystem, or people who live in other regions that have information they want to share.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll let everybody go. If you have any questions, let me know. But today today through Monday is about catching up on anything that you are missing. I'm going to be posting missing work assignments throughout the day. I'm supposed to have a scheduled power outage today, so we'll see how that goes. All right, I'll let you go.
Bye.
Bye.